Good morning, students. Today we're just going to go through some short answer feedback for your most recent assessment. I'll be touching on it in class today, but I won't be going into much detail with regard to the texts and what we were looking for. So it's important that you watch these videos. There's more than likely going to be two, as we carefully deconstruct the three texts that you were asked to write about. So this PowerPoint will be on Connect. Like I said, we will be going through it today in class, but very briefly. So there were three questions, one narrative, one non-fiction, and one still image. We'll start with the question one. Gave a lot of you a bit of difficulty. You can see there from the average that it was below what we were expecting. However, we knew when we put this in, it was going to be a bit tricky to kind of ascertain what it is we're after. But if you carefully deconstructed the question, you'd at least be able to propose or put forth an interpretation as to how you see or saw the protagonist. The contextual notes are there so that you know it is a fiction novel, 2017. Doesn't really help other than the fact that we know it's a novel, so we're looking for certain features of the novel text. Now, what I'd recommend, and I'll mention this in class, is that we should be deconstructing the questions to look for the command, concept, critical, and condition. Here, I suppose the critical is that invites you to see the protagonist, so it is open for interpretation. And then obviously the how, focusing on the language and or stylistic features. If we go to the syllabus, this will give you a bit of an understanding of any number of things that you could have discussed and mentioned in your response, whether it be simply the sentence structure, the vocabulary being used, or punctuation in the language features, or going further, looking at narrative point of view and the voice that comes through, which is determined by such things as the lexical choice and the syntax. Some of you began to look at this and started to touch on this idea in the text. However, it was often just a bit too superficial. I think with a question like this, you just have to first formulate your opinion of the protagonist and what is your interpretation. Now, I'd recommend having the document in front of you, this document here, so that you can kind of see what we're saying. So it immediately begins from where I sit. The story of Arthur Less is not so bad. So this narrative point of view, this suggests that there's some kind of relationship between the narrator and the character. The story of Arthur Less is not so bad would indicate that perhaps he does feel a bit sad and a bit pathetic. And then you sort of go to this next line. Look at him, seated primly on the hotel's lobby plush round sofa, blue suit and white shirt, legs knee crossed, so that one polished loafer hangs free of its heel. This vivid imagery, I suppose, really depicts a man, someone who's quite astute, someone who's quite well-to-do, but then it goes on, the pose of a young man. His slim shadow is, in fact, still that of his younger self, but at nearly 50, he is like those bronze statues in public parks that, despite one lucky knee rubbed by schoolchildren, discolor beautifully until they match the trees. So already we need to have this idea that he's a 50-year-old or approaching 50, and just think about the anxieties that come with that, approaching 50. He's perhaps someone holding on to his youth. Many of you picked up on that. And that comes through the repetition of that symbolism in the form of the clock. So that time motif carries through this text a lot, whether it be the ticking or the grandfather clock or the lobby clocks in general. And it goes on and it gets up to a point where this bottom part doesn't becomes obsolete, but there's so much rich language and stylistic features in here that can help you, make that observation about what sort of character he is. Many of you picked up on the fact that he might be an anxious kind of individual, but I suppose the true interpretation is just thinking about an individual who's holding on to something that has perhaps passed him by, whether it be the advances in technology or whether it just be holding on to a youth that has, as it sort of says, has become bronzed over time, has become weathered. So some of you got that and some of you were able to extrapolate that fact, but if you weren't able to get that understanding about the protagonist, then it was kind of hard for you to pin your argument using evidence in the terms of the language and all the stylistic features. It is a tricky text, but it is a text that you would expect to find in the WACE exam. I think it was a fair and balanced text when the question was rather simplistic, because it really gives you the conditions in that it's telling you what we're looking for in terms of your focusing, your reading, in that we're looking just for the protagonist. The next question was a little bit different, kind of again, rather balanced question. We're just looking at the perspectives, and in particular perspective, remembering that particular here is the critical, in that we're after what is the perspective being offered by the author. Now, we've given you some bit of contextual information. It does help here somewhat in that we know it's an opinion piece, so we would know that it's probably the view of Farrelly here, and 2015 establishes the context of the situational context in the Sydney Morning Herald. If we bring that text up, we're looking pretty much straightforward technique and how it contributes to the perspective. There is a lot in here, and most people, this was one of our higher scoring ones, with the average was 5.25. Probably I was expecting this to be pushed up to about 5.5, but people weren't really engaging with this idea of Australia, what it was and what it had become. So the author was playing around with that structure of, using it as a way to frame what Australia was, in that it was a land of the fair go, and like she mentions, a bit daggy, and then what it has slowly become. And we can see it in the way that she's constructed her opening paragraph. There's so much in here. And just the opening with that rhetorical question, I know what a rhetorical question is, so please don't tell me what a rhetorical question is in your responses, but automatically it's positioning the audience to really question their values and assumptions that we have as Australians about being the land of the free and the land, that's very American, but the land of the free and the land of the fair go. And it's calling into question what we hold as truth. And I think that's quite a confronting thing, and as a form of persuasion, doesn't always work because you're putting your audience offside. But we know what she's doing and how she's doing it, in that she's using those classic elements of rhetoric, and she's trying to persuade through use of inclusive language, through the use of statistics, and really trying to push that perspective that Australia is no longer what it used to be, and no longer is what it used to be, or Australia needs to let go of this idea that we are, this land of the fair go, and embrace the fact that, we are a country on its way up. We are a middle power who tries to play with the big boys in the form of like America and China, but we're not quite there. And along the way, we have let go of what it means to be Australian. And I think that's the perspective that really needed to be articulated. And some of you got there, but were too focused on the techniques, or too focused on the perspective without actually evaluating the techniques. Rhetorical questions are very easy to discuss, but it can fall into a discussion that's quite limited, in that it will put you in that 5 to 6 category out of 10. So what else could we have a look at here? Well, you could look at the structure of the opinion piece and how she has presented that binary opposition. You could look at the conversational tone and the conversational and colloquial diction and lexical choices she's making. Syntax is possible to do here, in that it does control the pace of the argument. It does come across as being a rather intimate piece of writing, but it also comes across as being quite relational. She's trying to develop that relationship with her audience, us as Australians, through using things like a bit daggy, everyone got a fair go, and then here, so we said, which is setting up that oppositional kind of approach. Interesting article, quite easy perspective, and again, hopefully you picked up something on there. Whether or not you agree or disagree, you would have an opinion on this. So just something I think we could have done just a slightly better. The next question, and I've just put up here perspective. Perspective will be covered in greater detail in Unit 4. However, we know that they will cover anything can come up in the Semester 1 exam because it's a concurrent unit, so you're doing Unit 3 and Unit 4 at the same time. But no one really misinterpreted what the perspective was, because we know it's a pretty simple syllabus concept, but it can be more than an opinion. It's a viewpoint informed by their context. In this situation, in a short answer, we don't know the context of the author. All we know is that it's the Sydney Morning Herald. Perhaps it might be
Ellie.
Questions. I forgot where I was up to. I just got interrupted here. It's hard to find a place in this school where it's empty. So we're just looking at that perspective, and like I said, these terms can come up in any or at any time, Semester 1 or Semester 2. The next question was done slightly worse than the previous. Normally the visual texts are done better because you have that more rich understanding of the meta language in terms of the construction. However, here where we fell down was in the discussion of the values and attitudes, and the particular values and attitudes. When you're encountering a question like this, you really need to engage that prior knowledge. We put this in as a text that is quite pertinent and quite relevant. It's very recent, and often you'll find in the WACE exam there will be a text, or normally an image or a magazine cover, that will deal with an issue that is quite contemporary, and by that I mean something that's happened within the last 3 or 4 months or within that school year. So this is why we encourage people to read the newspapers so they know what's going on in the world, because you're going to bring that and all that knowledge to this text. So here we know that we're after the values and attitudes, and in particular values and attitudes. Most people will touch on the values as they pertain to the Red Cross, but I think even before we get to the Red Cross, you need to consider the values and attitudes of Australians, and link it back to the previous article. Now, in the short answer section, there's normally links between two of the texts, if not directly stated when you have to compare the two texts, but otherwise here, this idea of a fair go, and an idea of mateship and courage, and what it means to be Australian is about unity and supporting one another in times of crises. This is the article. The article matches the story. So if people were able to kind of link the values within the previous article about that support and mateship that permeates Australian culture or society, you were able to put forth quite a strong thesis for this one. If you did mention the values held by the Red Cross and the associated attitudes that stem from those values, that was equally fine. But I think a lot of people miss the point about this image. Some people even said you made a comment about it being a house fire, and when if you're just looking at the times and what Red Cross were very prominent in the media and about the support they've provided during the Australian bushfires, your understanding of the meta language and the technical elements is strong, and there is a willingness for people to discuss the meta language and the construction elements. However, in this case, it wasn't matched well with the particular values and attitudes. So I think in the future, we need to better balance that argument. Yes, you can discuss the composition, the vectors, the framing in this, and just all the elements relating to the mise-en-scene, but make sure you link it. And I think on a number of people's responses, I kind of said to them that they're not balancing their responses. They're doing one thing, looking at the values and attitudes, but not talking about the construction elements, or vice versa. You're looking at the constructional elements without any little disregard to the values and attitudes. It needs to be better balanced, and that goes across all three questions. Here, the attitudes, I just put the syllabus term just to keep in line with the formatting of this PowerPoint. But what we will do today in class is look over these responses, mark and annotate question 3, because I didn't annotate that one. So we'll mark that and have a look at it. We will explore this feedback, and I think the feedback is, whilst it's broad and generic, these are things that you need to be ticking off, particularly in the even better if, in that idea that you know your textual features. There's so many things on Connect already that I've placed, and if you go to Connect, go to your Year 12 site, go to the content page, and then language features, glossaries, resources. Okay, there is plenty in here. You've got language features, glossary, stylistic devices. These posters are the posters from in class. This new one is one I put up. Okay, and they relate to expository text, basically non-fiction texts, and it goes through some of the conventions that we are expecting. So if we're thinking of that opinion piece, it is essentially a feature article. So what are we expecting? Okay, this one in particular, many people weren't making comment about how it does appeal to pathos, ethos, and logos. If you don't know what that is, you need to review. Okay, so there's lots of things in here that will help you build that understanding of the constructional elements, because that is what's missing. Now, I really enjoyed how some people were engaging with that aspect, and looking at the minutiae of the text construction, but again, has to be balanced with the argument, or with the effect and the purpose, which is the second part of the question. So moving forward, I'd suggest reviewing all the questions, and I'd further suggest looking at breaking them down. Every question, command, concept, critical condition, okay, making sure that you're addressing all of it. But what I would like you to do now is, with this knowledge about the text, I want you to reread the text and then choose one or two of your responses to rewrite it. Okay, maybe using the feedback from me or the feedback from your peers, you need to better embed evidence. Look back on Connect, there's that the PowerPoint or the resource there about embedding evidence. Remember, there's only one way to get better in English, it's through regular revisions. So make sure you take this opportunity to always revise, okay? I'll post some good answers later today with the permission of the students. Thank you.